Hi, this is your host Swapnil Bhartiya and welcome to another episode of Mainframe Matters, and we are here at Open Mainframe Summit in Philadelphia and I have two guests. It's great to see you folks again. We have, Elizabeth Joseph, you are developer advocate at IBM, and Sarah Julia Kriesch, you are DevOps Specialist at Accenture. First of all, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's first of all great to see you because I have met we have been talking, in different capacities, whether it was SUSE, OpenSUSE, Canonical, Ubuntu, Open Mainframe, OpenStack. So it's, that's the beauty of open source world. No matter where we work, we always, the community still remains same. So I will start with you. What are you doing these days?
So about 3.5 years ago, I left a container startup in San Francisco that I was working at, and I joined IBM. Because they were hoping to find a developer advocate for IBM Z Systems and Linux One who could speak to the open source community and Linux admins like me. It was kind of funny when they approached me because they're like, hey, you want to work on mainframes? And I'm like, I don't know what a mainframe is. I've been working in the technology space for over 15 years, and working in distributed systems, I just never encountered one really that I was conscious about. So it's been a really fascinating journey, learning all about that, and then sharing it back with the communities that I used to work with and people, and sharing things on social and at conferences. Maybe not so much in the past 2 years, but in general, just sharing that story of hey, Linux has been running on these things for 20 years. They're really fascinating hardware and machines. And so that is the majority of my work, is really just outreach to developers and folks in infrastructure, just building awareness.
Do you have a mainframe in the basement now?
I wish.
I thought you 3D printed something, right? You can
I have a little one at the booth. There's a little 3D printed.
Right.
You can get a selfie with it.
Let's hear from you. What are you doing these days?
In my case, I'm working at Accenture as a DevOps consultant as my main job. I wrote my bachelor thesis at IBM and moved to Accenture, that I'm allowed to contribute to open source again. And therefore, I'm also contributing to OpenSUSE, and I'm leading the OpenSUSE C Systems team. And from that, I had the idea that I want to have a benefit for all Linux distributions, that we can share our knowledge, our experience, and everything else related to IBM C Systems. And therefore, I had the idea to found the Linux distribution working group together with Elizabeth. And yes, I collect the ideas on customer side, what to improve for the future. And then my goal is to contribute it upstream then and bringing in my ideas, what I can see what to improve.
What role do you see Open Mainframe is playing in the mainframe ecosystem? Because first of all, mainframe they predate me, so then there are a lot of, developers who are really, really senior. You have to attract modern developers, but the interface is also, kind of old. Then Zoe came in. So talk about the role that Open Mainframe is playing in kind of building the bridges between the new world and that word.
Yeah, it's a great question. So one of the things that we've been working to do a lot around modernization and changing workflows, and I think something Sarah can speak to as well around DevOps, is that there's the traditional mainframe proprietary software that's a little bit hard to work with at times and doesn't necessarily integrate into our modern DevOps and other pipelines. And so one of the things that, first, IBM's improving that for sure. Our new releases of ZOS and new versions of everything pretty much is moving in that direction. But one of the things that the Open Mainframe project has done is bring a lot of stakeholders together who are interested in doing a lot of that modernization effort. So Zoe is a huge example of that, where it's creating more streamlined interface to interact with those more traditional systems, and then you can integrate them in your hybrid approach, whatever that may look like for you. And we're doing it in an open source manner, and so that all these companies can collaborate and then build their other tools on top of that.
And I want to hear your opinion as well. What are you seeing, because you're also a DevOps advocate, Accenture. So what are you seeing there, from the perspective of mainframe, Open Mainframe, and the whole DevOps culture?
From my perspective, I have got a mixture background of a Linux system administrator and a software engineer. So I worked before my studies as a Linux system administrator, put the software development education on top, and learned when the whole DevOps stack with automation and everything else. In my perspective, for the future, the best is with the Open Mainframe project that we bring all together. And when we have got the software development upstream as a foundation, and when we can automate all with the building stuff and everything else within the Linux distributions, and when we can see is all working or not, and if not, then we can collaborate together, ask the other Linux distributions for their solutions, and when we have got the DevOps principle within the Linux distributions, and bring that all to the customers, and we have got equality everywhere. So that is the benefit what we can achieve together within the Linux distribution working group in the Open Mainframe project, that we have got the automation layer. If anything is red, we can ask, is there any solution in our Linux distributions? We are receiving feedback. If the other Linux distributions have no solutions, when we can speak with IBM. Ulrich Weigand is, as a distinguished engineer, available, and then we can figure out solutions together.
Excellent. I want to talk a bit about this new Linux distribution working group. First of all, what is this group all about? And I also want to talk about, because Linux has, created a lot of ways for adoption of open source. We don't talk much about Git. Everybody just talk GitHub. I mean, it can be GitLab or whatever it is. But these are two technologies which is kind of driving the modern kind of adoption there. So first, let's talk about the working group, and then we'll talk about how you folks will, further liberate or democratize the mainframe world.
Yeah. So the working group. So the timeline here is kind of there was a Debian working group, and the goal there was to attract folks to work on Debian, the Debian port for S390X. And then Sarah was like, "Can we have an OpenSUSE one?" And then that's when we kind of got together, and I'm like, you know what? We don't actually need one for every distribution. What we need is something for all the distributions, because we already have our own mailing lists and everything for all of these distributions. So the real benefit here is the collaboration. And so we quickly recruited, we've got OpenSUSE, we've got my contacts in the Debian and Ubuntu communities. We pulled in some folks. One of the guys from Fedora, Dan, he's already a part of the Open Mainframe project. So it was really easy to get that sort of initial cohort. And then from there, we brought in, as you said, like Uli from the DT from IBM. So he works on the tools team in Germany. And he was able, he's able to, as you say, like push some of the things forward for us inside of IBM. So the original group was just really good, and we kind of hit the ground running with sharing issues that come up and bugs that we need to fix, letting each other know of like upcoming things. Like there was an issue with OpenGDK, and Dan messaged us. He's like, hey, this is a thing that's out there, and then within a few weeks it was fixed, and it wasn't really on the radar of another distribution. So we were like, oh, that's cool. So we have monthly meetings, and then we have a mailing list, and that is where we are. So that's pretty much what we do, and I'd say we've been very successful. I'm sure you can come up with other examples.
As she said, you approach her, can we have support for? So how did you perceive, mainframe, and why you felt that, OpenSUSE should also have support? And then when she proposed that, it should be, what about your person? Because in Linux community, their distributions, they have their own maintainers, their own supporters, so it's a bit of different approach. So talk about, I want to hear your perspective on that.
Yes, in my case, I came into the mainframe world via the academic mainframe consortium, that I received an introduction into the mainframe world when I met Karl-Heinz Strassemeyer, the founder of Linux on C systems, and he told me about that. And when I said, okay, I want to join this approach, and I want to become also a Linux on C developer. And on this way, I knew that we have got a OpenSUSE C systems team, and after my bachelor thesis, I wanted to join this team, and then I became a team lead of this team and have educated all and everything else. But from my point of view, there was something missing. There were some issues which were not fixed, and that should be fixed on application level, and I said, okay, our Linux distributions will have got the same problem. not only how we should receive the information how to fix it in the future, because it is a lot of work to search for these solutions. And so it was a really good idea by Elizabeth to create a Linux distribution working group for all. And then, from my point of view, we have got our monthly meetings. We are sharing our knowledge. Everybody is receiving the information how to fix the problems. And on this way, we have achieved a benefit for all. Every user can have a benefit at the end. Every IBM customer can use it. And so we have got the best support you can receive from my point of view.
Right. How old is the group officially?
About a year. A year in October.
Right. So if I ask, how much you think that you have achieved so far, and what is your long-term goal and plan? Of course, you have already dominated the world Linux, dominance, so that is out of the scope. But
sort of short-term, it really is like pulling in all of the Linux distributions that have S390 exports, because there's still a few stragglers that I have to pull in. So that's kind of like the first, within the next 6 months, I want to just bring in the rest into the fold. And then really beyond that, I think I'd like to see us do more maybe upstream work. So maybe instead of just the Linux distributions, maybe we work with some of the big projects like OpenGDK, which comes up a lot because a lot of the mainframe shops are Java shops too. And so that those workloads work well on Linux One. So maybe work with some of those projects, and so that we can work more closely to get patches, upstreamed. Because there's work, by all of us going into all of these to do the patches, and distributions do them, and IBM does them, and other companies. So sort of getting all of us together upstream, because we're all pulling from the same place. So I think maybe we can still call it the Linux Distributions Working Group, but we can maybe expand our scope somewhat.
Let's just flip it, that the experience that you have here, by creating a working group, which is kind of, distribution, desktop, agnostic. But when we look at the Linux, desktop Linux community in general, it's all very focused on distribution. Do you think you can bring the same model there as well, so that there is a group which is just focused on the desktop community, not on Arch or Gentoo or OpenSUSE or SUSE or Fedora or Elementary?
I think...
What lessons?
Yeah, I think architecture is very special. And so instead of working just with a set of packages, we're working just with a different hardware architecture. So I think we're in kind of a unique position. And I think other architectures have done this. Like there's working groups for ARM, and I know RISC-V is out there doing a lot of this work. And so, bringing that to other communities, for sure, like SIGs and working groups, I think is a good idea.
We have got all the teams for other architectures, but the difference to ARM and everything else is that we have got all the developers from ARM in the OpenSUSE community who are working full-time there. We had also one developer for Power who has worked together for Fedora and OpenSUSE in the same time. So these people are working on the different Linux distributions and are putting their development stuff there in the same time. That is the difference there. Now the Power developer is retired and we didn't receive any replacement, so the whole work is on community side now. And then we have to look that we can do the whole work as a community, and where is the working group missing then? So we have got a developer for ARM in OpenSUSE, but the rest is in community hands or on SUSE side. RISC-V is in the hands of SUSE at the moment as an example, because they have started it for OpenSUSE. The whole testing setup will be done by SUSE, and then we have to look within the community how to do the work.
And I think this also brings up an interesting point about collaboration between distributions in general. As you say, like it happens all the time, and it's funny because we see these distro wars. they're not among the developers. Like, we always work together. We always have worked together, and we know each other. I joke at conferences, like I got the a selfie with like the Fedora project lead, and we swapped laptops. So I had all the Fedora, and he had all the Ubuntu on the laptop, and that was cute and funny. But and everyone's like, oh my gosh, aren't you enemies? I'm like, no, we're buddies. Like, we're friends. So I think just kind of dispelling that myth. I mean, it's kind of funny to me, but in the user community, that like the distributions are at war. We're not, and I think groups like this that are cross distribution, I'd like to see more of them, because we're already doing a lot of this informally.
You're absolutely right. That developers, even with the commercial space, IBM and not IBM, Red Hat and Mirantes and SUSE, they can compete in the market, but developers, they just work together, in the background. Now, we talked about mostly Linux community side of the story. Let's look at the Open Mainframe side. What kind of interaction you have with the Open Mainframe community? The working group.
So the thing is, with the Open Mainframe project, it's mostly focused on ZOS and sort of the traditional workloads. So there are a few Linux projects, but we end up kind of being in a separate area of the project, just because we're different. And we'd like to change that because of some of the hybrid cloud interactions and stuff. Like, you can run Zoe on Linux and interact with the mainframe and such. One of the other projects I work on is the software discovery tool. And that allows you to search through like a dozen Linux distributions, but also we have a hand-curated list of open source software from ZOS and some ZOS tools, some Unix system services. And with that, it's just a web interface, but with that, you can search through everything. And with that project, I'm kind of trying to bridge the gap. Like, this is all open source software on the mainframe, regardless of whether you're running ZOS or, OpenSUSE, or OpenSUSE we added a couple months ago to the tool. So, or Red Hat, or whatever you're using. And I think that project for me is the one that's kind of bridging the gap between the two sides of Linux and ZOS and whatnot.
And what is your interaction with the Open Mainframe community as part of this working group?
Yes, until now that is only the Linux distribution working group, that I can bring the Linux distributions together. I have learned a little bit COS in the past with Master the Mainframe, but that was it. It is difficult to receive access to mainframe hardware with COS. It is easier to receive access to the Linux One community cloud.
Right. I think Broadcom is donating their Z15. So will you folks get access to that? I mean, you don't need. You have in the basement, but.
Right. So that is, so that was exciting news from the keynote today around Broadcom donating a mainframe to the Open Mainframe project. So that will be a public resource as far as I understand it, and people will apply for accounts on that. So yeah, you'll totally be able to get one, and I'll get one, and we'll all have a little baby ZOS, and that'll be great.
Since we are here, also kind of you're talking about the kind of different communities within the working group. It's almost sounded like a hybrid, but we also live in if we move out of the mainframe, everybody talks about cloud native. So there also we talk about hybrid, multi-cloud, and with the mainframe, the fact is today modern economy more or less run on mainframe. Every transaction goes through mainframe without us realizing it. But the fact is that a lot of companies will be leveraging different technologies. And you folks have been in both Linux world and the mainframe world. So how do you see that world? Because there's a lot of kind of roadblocks are there. They're also working on embracing Git there, which also means different challenges. So if I ask you folks, how do you look at this hybrid world where it's not mainframe versus cloud? It will always be mainframe and the rest of the things.
I gave last week a talk in this direction at the IBMC Day, because Accenture has got a cloud-first strategy, and the art is to integrate the mainframe into the cloud world with the hybrid cloud, and with the Kubernetes topic and OpenShift topic, which is available, you can combine that as a hybrid cloud. Now, SUSE has bought also Rancher as an example. Rancher is providing that also. So you have got the choice between multiple Kubernetes distributions you can use, and then you can deploy it on the mainframe side, the same as in the public cloud. And then you have got the hybrid cloud solution. You can watch it all together, combine it. You have got your monitoring, watching all the Kubernetes clusters, unimportant whether you have got it on the mainframe or in the public cloud, and then you have got it running everywhere. And so you can combine the mainframe together with the public cloud or any other private cloud, and then the mainframe is integrated.
Yeah. And you're also a great example of public cloud, and because you're like OpenStack community, so private cloud and then public cloud with and now mainframe. So same question to you as well.
Yeah. So fun fact: the Linux One Community Cloud, where we give away VMs to just anyone, it uses OpenStack for the provisioning, so that's fun. But as far as where the mainframe kind of lives in this hybrid, I mean, I can't speak authoritatively on behalf of all of IBM's.
Yes, you can.
But the kind of patterns that I've been seeing have been like we use the mainframe as sort of the point of record. So like all the important stuff and all of our like source data and like everything, it lives there because that is where it has to live, because the machine is fast, it is focused on data, and that is what it was built to do from the beginning. And so that ends up being your record, and then you build onto it with these cloud technologies. So you may use something like MongoDB to actually access some of the data through your other interfaces. And so it's kind of like taking some of the data and moving it off and like sort of building this system. So one of the other interesting things is the new Telum chip, and with that, the AI accelerator that does inferencing really fast in sort of the AI and machine learning field. And if you're not familiar, there's sort of like two sides of machine learning. There's training, which is where you sort of train up your model and you on data that you have, and then you have what you want it to do. And then there's inference, which is actually what it does on the data, like when it happens. So the example we like to use is credit card transactions. So you train your model, and this can be done, on x86, your GPU farms, like whatever you already have for training models, and be like, this is what fraud looks like, computer, like, process this and when a transaction comes up. And so then what the Telum chip does is it has that really fast AI accelerator, and that will actually do the inferencing. So it takes the model and it says, okay, send me the transactions. The transactions are coming in, and then it does what it does with that model. And so then we end up with tiny millisecond response time for actually judging whether a transaction is fraudulent or not. And that is just another one of the ways that the mainframe plays in this space, because you can do workloads on your cloud side, and then once it's trained, you can bring it over to the mainframe.
Elizabeth, Sarah, thank you so much for sitting down with me and talk about this working group and the whole involvement that you folks. Thank you so much. And as I said, I look forward to talking to you folks again. Thank you.
Thank you.